after Rome fell in the West, my previous lecture on early Christian period, I talked about that the Roman Empire had been split in two. What was left of it, the Roman Empire didn't fall and totally disappear, was the eastern half of the empire. And it survived until 1453 CE. The capital of the eastern part of the empire was Constantinople, named after Constantine the Great. And today it's known as Istanbul. So that's where its location is. But it survived. It went on after the fall of the western half of the empire. So don't imagine it disappeared. Its name changed. It was called the Byzantine Empire because of this idea of its more adhering to the ideas of Greece, and Byzantine in a way means Greek-like. Okay, but it's still the eastern half of the Roman Empire. So let's look at where it's at and what began to happen there. Okay, so we have the old western half of the empire, and now this is the eastern half of the empire, now called the Byzantine Empire. There's the capital, and by the 530s, a charismatic leader named Justinian, Justinian, aspired to recreate the Roman Empire and recapture the old half, the western half of the empire. But he had to fight to take it. When Rome fell, the barbarians invaded, and the last Roman emperor who called himself a Roman emperor was German. Odoacer was his name. But Justinian was going to retake it, and he embarked on an ambitious program to take back that. And you can see here the way that he, traveled into the old western half of the empire. He did an assault on the top of Africa that was part of the old western half of the empire, and then he also went into Italy through the Balkans, coming in this way, and his troops meeting up here, and they conquered the Ostrogoths. So he did manage to regain it, but he made his capital up here in the city of Ravenna. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but Ravenna. He chose to change that because Rome was in shambles, the city itself. Okay. He, governing in Constantinople, was very progressive. Justinian was a really strong leader. He was extremely charismatic, and he also was a proponent of the things from the past. He was one of the first people to kind of invent architecture after the fall of Rome. And in fact, his seminal text, you're going to laugh, that he had written about the building programs he engaged in was called Buildings, very innovative title. But he wanted to continue a great tradition of building, and so he took that inspiration with him when he went to Ravenna in Italy. But let's look at one of the buildings in Constantinople that's going to influence the evolution of building in the West, and that's going to be the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia, if you take these away, and I know it's kind of hard to, but imagine they're not there. Those were added later after Constantinople was overrun by the Ottoman Turks. They converted the Church of the Holy Wisdom into a mosque. Okay, it is today a museum, but it was a church first. Okay, but it had this really super innovative dome. Now, I don't know if you remember the architecture lecture I gave, but domes came out of the East, so they had a tradition of dome building. Not so in the West. So he's going to take that kind of ambition. There's going to be domes in the West before this, so the Pantheon certainly does show you that. But this is going to be kind of the idea that domes should be on large public structures, and the Hagia Sophia is going to help promote that agenda. If we look at it, it's a large structure. The dome was beautifully constructed. It's very innovative because of all the windows. If we go into the interior, you can see here, it had all of these windows and it allowed light to pour in. We still see those old Roman arches here. But notice another different thing. The interior walls of the Hagia Sophia are decorated with mosaics as well as gold tiles. All right, so it is going to look very different from anything we see emerging in the Middle Ages. It'll have a huge influence, the Byzantine style, on the Middle Ages because of that gold background, but also because of the way the mosaics look. And I'm going to show you some up close. But let's look at some of the, the space here. A large building. It's certainly one of the most impressive structures. And if I remember correctly, the Hagia Sophia's, I want to say it's the 4th largest dome in the world. I'll get back to that when we talk more about domes later on. But this is very much a part of Byzantine aesthetics. We see a lot of patterns in not only here in the railing, but also for the capitals of the columns. They're not going to look very Greek. They're going to be very complex patterns. It's very Byzantine. Today, it's history as a mosque. You can see that. And what happened was all of the Christian images were covered over. In Islam, you don't have images. But in Christianity, you do. So a recent, it's probably 10 years ago now, that a discovery was that underneath some of the interior, they use like little tiles to cover over some of those mosaics. Some of those old mosaics are still there, and I'll show you a couple of those. But look at that dome. Isn't that beautiful? It seems to float on that sea of light. And light is a metaphor for God. And so it allows the light to shine into the structure. This is one of those old mosaics that's been uncovered. And look at, I told you, it's like an intricate fretwork here. It's a beautiful pattern work, It's certainly very high quality. Carrying the inheritance of the Greeks a little further and giving it its own Byzantine look. And it is very Byzantine because what we're going to see happen in the Byzantine style, we're going to see Christ, look, he's going to become bearded. This is where we get the bearded Christ figure. It comes out of the Byzantine world. He's also going to be very tall and thin. All figures will become very drawn out. It's called attenuation. All right. Again, I wish I was in the classroom. I'd write that word for you, but attenuation is a idea of making things and pulling them thinner, if you will. And the body will be less and less emphasized. In the early Christian lecture, I told you that there was a move towards abstraction. That's what I hinted at it. Let's say I probably didn't use that exact term, but that's where we're heading. A move away from realism. And in the Middle Ages, we'll see everything is very abstracted. The body will disappear underneath clothing. It will just simply be a very long figure that's very linear with a lot of pattern work in it. Christ sits on the throne here, and around his head is the circle that's known as the mandorla, Mandorla, the forerunner of the halo. Notice he has in his mandorla these 3 lines. These are supposed to represent the rays of the sun, as he's the Son of God. He also has his hand raised here, and you'll see it again. I'll put my fingers in front of the camera here for a second. The sign he's making looks like that. All right? It's not the peace sign that the hippies did. It's much earlier. And so essentially, this is first. It's a sign of blessing. And so we'll see that quite often. But these are the characteristics of the Byzantine style. Gold background, long thin figure, the use of the mandorla, and Christ is Pantocrator, all-seeing, all-knowing. All right? It's the ruler of the universe. Ruler over all. it's especially obvious in Byzantine church decoration. Here he is. Look at that. All right, another image from the Hagia Sophia. Notice Mary, the lack of body underneath. Women become very defeminized. You will not see breasts. You'll not see hair most often. And yes, she does have her head covered. And yes, women did cover their hair in the Christian world, just as they did in the Islamic world. That is not something that comes out of Islam. It comes out of the period. A good woman covered her head after marriage. And this is for centuries. So, understand where things come from. Notice also Christ with the sign of blessing. And notice he's not a baby. We'll not see Christ as a baby ever in the Middle Ages in the Byzantine world. Never, never, never. The concept was just unbelievable to them. They would have never believed that. Justinian's building program was ambitious, like I said, as he is influenced by the building of the Hagia Sophia. But then in Italy, he takes over the small town of Ravenna. And in Ravenna, he had the most prosperous city in the West for a while. It's a small, small town. Believe me, if you go there, I went there years ago. Oh my goodness, it was a long time ago. The first time my husband and I went to Italy, and we were backpacking and everything, and it was a lot smaller, but I went there to see San Vitale, and it was one of the structures he had built. Notice it's got the drum in the center. All right, so the same idea is being used here. It's not a building that's a front door, back door. It's a circular structure around a dome-like configuration. San Vitale was the crown jewel of Ravenna because of its interior. It doesn't look like much outside. You can see it's a center plan building, like I was saying. That means the high altar's in the middle. And it looks rather plain from the exterior, but it's the interior that's just stupendous. It's like a little jewel box inside, very Byzantine in feel. You can see here it has this beautiful floor, and we'll talk about these mazes again. Labyrinth is a more formal word for it. We'll see them again in the Middle Ages. They were very popular. But it is a beautiful structure, but it's truly the mosaics that make it different. And also look at the intricate capitals on the columns here. Very Byzantine, with the drilled out work. It's a gorgeous building. That's how you would see the high altar. The most impressive mosaic possibly there, although the other two I'm going to show you are certainly just as interesting. Christ here sitting on top of the world. Yes, the world is round, and it's because people knew the world was round, because the Greeks knew the world was round. That's the idea of the world was flat, and Columbus thought that. I'm sorry, people who want to believe that, no one believed that in that period. Anyone who was learned, who could read, realized that. And there's Christ with his mandorla, receiving the model of San Vitale on the day of its consecration. But it's the two mosaics on either side of the high altar, the one showing Justinian and his wife Theodora, that most people talk about in San Vitale because of their own personal story. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. Justinian, the great ruler of the Byzantine world, was infatuated with his wife Theodora. Married her after seeing her perform in a circus. She was a circus performer, but not a circus you'd take your child to. If you read some of the more titillating stories about her, she danced nude, and she danced with a goose. These are all stories. It's a great book, The Secret History, that talks about her. And he saw her perform, and he fell in love with her. His advisors here hated her, especially because she had a lot of power over Justinian. He was a very smart man. He was an incredible general, but yet, you know, kind of was powerless to Theodora's charms. He is totally smitten by her, and a lot of people say that no matter what she did, he forgave her. One of his advisors called her the greatest whore in Christendom. She was known to take lovers, but he still, you know, allowed her a great influence on his wife. So I kind of went there to see those when I first went there, and also to see these beautiful pieces of, you know, mosaic work. Let's look at the style here. Look at that Byzantine form. Very long, linear, I mean, the body's basically gone. It's not realistic. Look at the people's feet. They're all standing on each other's feet. There's no attempt to make you feel as if this is reality. But again, you have to accept that this is the focus, is the spirituality. The gold background, typically Byzantine. The use of the mandorla, typically Byzantine. For Theodora, we have the same thing. The disembodied figure. Look at the women. They don't have breasts. They don't have hair. All gone. It just doesn't exist. They stand on each other's feet. And they barely have feet. Showing your ankles was considered very risque in the ancient world. In the Middle Ages, I mean, you just only showed your ankles and your hair to your husband. Men just couldn't handle it, you know, ladies. But certainly, she doesn't look like a femme fatale like some people think. But when you look closely at her, I found it really interesting. You can see the mosaic work. Isn't that beautiful? Look at the large eyes. It's just very, very much focused on the idea of the inner self. And then I noticed she had that kind of long face. She reminded me of Cher, and I don't know if you know the performer, but that's who she kind of reminds me of. And so I just thought, or as one of my other students said, Kim Kardashian. Well, they're from that part of the world. Armenian, you know, so they're from that. They have that heritage, so maybe that's what I'm seeing. But really a beautiful thing. And the Byzantine style is hugely influential on the Middle Ages. Do not forget that. There are things that will not go away for at least another 800 years. The gold background. Look at the Madonna and Child here. All right. Look at that beautiful pattern of her clothing. But we only feel a suggestion of body here in the knees. The feet are almost not there. Notice how her hair, no breasts, nothing suggesting femininity. And then look at her hands, how long and drawn out they are. The Christ child with the sign of blessing, and then with this mandorla. And again, notice he's not a baby. He will not be a baby for years. So get used to it. He's like a little man. As I said, the mind of the Middle Ages could not fathom Christ being like a baby. That was too helpless. So I hope that makes you understand it's like this transition period between the Roman Empire and the Middle Ages, and that's where we will go next. Thanks for hanging in there. Hope it was interesting. Don't forget about Justinian and Theodora. Peace out.